I had always believed in love. The kind that withstands storms, the kind that anchors you in place when the world tries to pull you apart. And for a while I thought I had found it. My husband, Daniel, was everything I had ever wanted. Charming, ambitious, and full of promises. We had built a life together, one that I thought was unbreakable. Then everything changed. I still remember the exact moment my world crumbled. I was 5 months pregnant, glowing with anticipation for the little life growing inside me. I had just finished setting up the nursery, a small but beautiful room painted in soft blues and yellows. That day I had prepared Daniel's favorite dinner, eager to share the excitement of our upcoming future. But when he walked through the door, something was different. His shoulders were tense, his gaze distant. "We need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. My heart pounded. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to soften the blow. But then, with brutal finality, he said, "I'm leaving." I blinked, my breath hitching. "Leaving? What do you mean?" I met someone else." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Someone else. My fingers instinctively went to my belly, cradling the unborn child we had created together. "Daniel, we're going to have a baby." My voice trembled. "You can't just." "I didn't plan for this to happen," he interrupted, his jaw clenched. "But I fell in love with her." Fell in love with her. A wave of nausea rolled over me, not from pregnancy but from sheer devastation. The man I had trusted, the man who had vowed to stand by my side, was walking away. Just like that. Tears blurred my vision. "What about our child? What about me?" "I'll make sure you're taken care of financially," he said, as if that would fix everything. As if money could replace a father's love. I shook my head in disbelief. "Daniel, this isn't just about money. This is about our family." He looked away, guilt flickering in his eyes for the briefest moment. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough to change what was happening. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hollow. "But I have to go." And then, just like that, he turned his back on me. On us. I stood frozen in place, my hands still protectively cradling my stomach. I wanted to scream, to beg, to demand answers. But what was the point? The man I had loved was already gone, even as he walked out the door. That night, I lay awake in the nursery, surrounded by baby clothes and tiny blankets. The room that had once been filled with warmth and dreams now felt empty, haunted by promises that would never be kept. But as I rested my hand over my belly, I felt a small, fluttering kick. A reminder. He might have left, but I wasn't alone. I still had my child. And from that moment on, I vowed that I would never let his abandonment define me. I would rise again, no matter what. The days after Daniel left were a blur of pain and exhaustion. At first, I was trapped in an endless cycle of disbelief, waking up expecting to see him beside me, reaching for my phone to text him, only to remember that he was gone. Every room in our home felt colder, the silence pressing in on me like a heavy fog. But the worst part wasn't the heartbreak. It was the loneliness. I had no one to turn to. My family lived states away, and most of my friends had been our friends. People who now avoided me, unsure of how to act around the woman who had been left behind. My once full life had become a quiet void. And yet, in the middle of my grief, life didn't slow down. My pregnancy progressed, my body changing in ways I wasn't prepared for. What was supposed to be a time of joy, doctor's visits, baby shopping, nursery decorating, became an overwhelming reminder that I was doing this alone. I remember one particular doctor's appointment vividly. I sat in the waiting room, surrounded by glowing couples, husbands holding their wives' hands, excitedly discussing baby names. And there I was, alone, clutching my medical forms with trembling fingers. When the nurse called my name, I felt every pair of eyes on me, silently asking the same question. Where is the father? I forced myself to stand tall, to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. But inside I felt like I was crumbling. The doctor's gentle voice pulled me back to the present. Would you like to hear the heartbeat? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. And then there it was. A steady, rhythmic thumping filling the small room. Strong, unwavering, alive. My baby's heartbeat. A wave of emotions crashed over me, relief, wonder, love. It was the first time since Daniel had left that I felt something other than pain. I had been so consumed by my heartbreak that I had forgotten the most important thing. I wasn't alone. That tiny heartbeat reminded me that I had a reason to keep going. a reason to fight. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Daniel's betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let his absence turn me into someone bitter and broken. I had a child to raise, a future to build. So I started over. I moved out of the house we had shared, unable to bear the memories that haunted its walls. I found a small apartment, not much but mine. I picked up extra hours at work, saving every penny for the baby. I took birthing classes alone, learning how to be both a mother and a father. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, exhausted and afraid. Mornings when I woke up to overwhelming anxiety, wondering if I was strong enough to do this. But each day I pushed forward. I found comfort in the little things. The first tiny kicks, the warmth of the sun on my face as I decorated the nursery, the kindness of strangers who offered a helping hand when I least expected it. And slowly I began to heal. Not because I had stopped loving Daniel, but because I had started loving myself again. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone to save me. I was saving myself. And I was doing it for the person who mattered most, my child. The months passed faster than I expected. The weight of heartbreak never fully disappeared, but it became easier to carry. Every kick, every fluttering movement inside me was a reminder that I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing for something greater. Then the day finally arrived. It started with a dull ache in the middle of the night, pulling me from restless sleep. At first, I thought it was just another discomfort, another symptom of pregnancy. But then the pain deepened, coming in steady waves. By the time I reached the hospital, I was gripping the edge of my seat, my breath shallow as contractions surged through me. I had imagined this moment so many times. I had read every book, watched every video, prepared for every possibility. But nothing truly prepares you for the overwhelming reality of bringing life into the world. Labor was long. Hours blurred together, filled with pain, exhaustion, and moments where I didn't think I could keep going. I had no hand to hold, no reassuring voice whispering that I was doing great. But I had something stronger: determination. And then, finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I heard it. A sharp, piercing cry. Tears flooded my eyes as a nurse gently placed a small, wriggling body into my arms. My baby. A little boy, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around mine, his face scrunched up as he took his first breaths in this world. I had thought I knew love before. But in that moment, holding my son against my chest, I felt love in a way I never had before. Unshakable. Boundless. I whispered his name for the first time. The name I had chosen alone. The name that now belonged to the little soul who had given my life a whole new meaning. As I stared down at him, everything else faded. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness. It didn't matter anymore. I wasn't just a woman who had been left behind. I was a mother. And that was more powerful than anything Daniel had taken from me. I promised Liam right there in that hospital room that I would give him a life full of love. That I would never let him feel like he was missing something, even if his father had chosen not to be there. It wouldn't always be easy. But as I traced my fingers over his soft, tiny features, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone. I never had been. Because from this moment forward, my life belonged to something far greater than my past. It belonged to my son. And I would fight for him with everything I had. Time has a way of healing wounds, even the deepest ones. The first few months after Liam's birth were the hardest. I was exhausted beyond anything I had ever known, surviving on caffeine and sheer willpower. Late-night feedings, doctor visits, endless diaper changes. Motherhood was both beautiful and utterly overwhelming. But I adapted. I learned to function on little sleep, to juggle work and motherhood, to celebrate the small victories, like the first time Liam slept through the night or the moment he reached out for me with tiny, trusting hands. And as Liam grew, so did I. I stopped thinking about Daniel. At first, it was an effort, pushing the thoughts away, forcing myself not to wonder what his life looked like now. Did he ever regret leaving? Did he ever think about the child he abandoned? But with time, those questions became meaningless. I had built a life without him, one where Liam was happy and thriving. Still, I won't pretend it was easy. Raising a child alone had its challenges. There were moments of self-doubt, nights where I cried quietly in my room, afraid I wasn't doing enough. But every time Liam laughed, every time he reached for me with his bright, innocent eyes, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Then one day life surprised me. I met someone new. His name was Ryan. It happened on an ordinary afternoon at a small cafe. I was balancing a squirming, energetic toddler on one hip while trying to pay for my coffee, my bag slipping from my shoulder, frustration creeping in. That's when he stepped in. "Here, let me help." I looked up, meeting kind brown eyes and a warm, easy smile. At first I was hesitant. After Daniel, after everything I had been through, I wasn't interested in romance. My heart had been burned too badly and my focus was on Liam. But Ryan didn't push. He was different. We kept running into each other, at the grocery store, at the park where I took Liam to play. And every time he was patient, kind. He never made me feel like I was less because I was a single mother. Instead, he admired my strength. Over time I let my guard down. One evening, after weeks of casual conversations, I finally agreed to let him take me out for dinner. It was the first time in years that I had allowed myself to enjoy being with someone. And slowly I realized something. Ryan wasn't trying to fix me. He wasn't trying to replace what had been lost. He was simply there. Supportive. Caring. Understanding. And the best part? Liam loved him. I watched as Ryan knelt down to my son's level, patiently helping him tie his shoes. I saw the way he listened to Liam's excited toddler chatter, genuinely interested in every word. For the first time I saw a man who didn't see Liam as baggage. He saw him as a gift. One evening, as we sat on my couch after putting Liam to bed, Ryan looked at me with that same steady warmth I had come to trust. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "Not anymore." Tears burned behind my eyes. Because for the longest time I had convinced myself that I had to. That no one would ever stay. That love was something fleeting, something that always ended in heartbreak. But Ryan proved me wrong. Love wasn't just grand gestures and passionate declarations. Sometimes love was simple. It was showing up. It was being there. And as I rested my head against his shoulder, I realized I had finally found someone who saw me, truly saw me. Not as the woman who had been left behind, but as the woman who had survived. And for the first time in a long time I let myself believe in love again. Because this time it was real. And I wasn't afraid. For the first time in years my life felt full. Not perfect, because what life ever is. But real. The kind of life I had once thought I would never have again. Ryan became a constant presence, not just for me but for Liam too. He never pushed, never tried to insert himself where he wasn't wanted, but he was there. In the small moments. The important ones. Like when Liam had a fever at 2 a.m. and I was too exhausted to think straight. Ryan showed up at my door with medicine and a look of quiet determination, holding me steady when I felt like I was falling apart. Like when Liam took his first steps, wobbling toward Ryan instead of me, laughing as he stumbled into his waiting arms. Like when I had my first real job interview since becoming a mother, nervous and doubting myself, and Ryan kissed my forehead and said, "You're going to do amazing." He was there in ways Daniel never had been. He didn't just love me, he loved us. It was terrifying in a way. Letting someone in again. Trusting that this time, it wouldn't end in betrayal. But Ryan had patience where I had fear, and with time I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved this happiness. Our relationship wasn't rushed. It unfolded naturally over months of late-night talks and quiet mornings filled with laughter. Liam adored him. At first I worried about that. What if things didn't work out? What if I let someone into our lives only for them to leave, just like Daniel had? But Ryan wasn't like that. One day as I watched him play with Liam at the park, spinning him in the air while my son giggled uncontrollably, something inside me clicked. This was different. This was real. One evening as we sat on my small couch, Liam already fast asleep in his room, I finally voiced the question that had been lingering in my mind. Do you ever feel like you got more than you signed up for? Ryan looked at me, genuinely confused. What do you mean? I hesitated, then sighed. I come with a lot of history, Ryan. A lot of baggage. I don't want you to feel like you have to take all of that on. His gaze softened. Emma, you're not baggage. Liam's not baggage. He reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers. You're family. And I want to be part of that. Tears pricked at my eyes, but for once they weren't from pain. They were from something much rarer. Hope and love. True, unwavering, unconditional love. A few weeks later he met my parents for the first time. I hadn't seen them much since everything happened with Daniel, mostly because I had been too ashamed to admit how badly I had fallen apart after he left. But now, standing beside Ryan, I felt different. Stronger. Like someone who had built something instead of just surviving. My mother, always the cautious one, pulled me aside at the end of the evening. "He seems like a good man." I smiled, watching as Ryan helped my father pack away the dishes. "He is." And for the first time I truly believed that love didn't have to be painful. It could be safe. Could be forever. That night, as Liam slept peacefully in his bed, I curled up beside Ryan and whispered the words I had been too afraid to say before. "I love you." He didn't hesitate. "I love you too." And this time I knew he meant it. Because love isn't just words. It's actions. It's showing up. And Ryan always did. Life had finally settled into something good. Something I hadn't thought I would ever have again. Liam was growing fast, his laughter filling every corner of our home. Ryan had become an irreplaceable part of our lives. Steady, loving, always there. The three of us had become a family. Not the kind that's made by blood alone, but the kind that's built on trust, effort, and unconditional love. I had moved on. And then one ordinary afternoon my past came crashing back. I was at the park with Liam, watching as he ran across the grass, his little feet kicking up dust as he chased after his toy airplane. The warm breeze carried his giggles through the air and I smiled, feeling at peace. Then I heard his voice. "Emma?" The world seemed to tilt. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. "Daniel." He stood a few feet away, looking almost the same but different. His once pristine appearance now slightly rougher, his face lined with something that looked dangerously close to regret. My entire body went cold. He shouldn't be here. He had no reason to be here. But there he was, standing in front of me, looking at me like he had the right to. "Emma," he said again, taking a step closer. "It's been a long time." I swallowed hard, my hands clenching into fists. "What do you want?" His eyes flickered past me, toward Liam. Toward our son. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. "Oh, not now. Not after all these years." "Is he?" Daniel's voice trailed off, his expression unreadable. My pulse pounded. I didn't owe him an explanation. I didn't owe him anything. "You need to leave," I said, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. Daniel hesitated. "Emma, please. I just want to talk." "About what?" I snapped. "The fact that you walked out on me when I was pregnant? Or the part where you left me to raise our son alone while you built a new life with someone else?" Guilt flickered across his face. "I made a mistake." I let out a bitter laugh. "A mistake? That's what you call abandoning your family?" Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" I cut him off. "That I was carrying your child. That you were leaving more than just me behind." He looked away, shame coloring his features. "I wasn't ready." The words hit me like a slap. Not ready. And I had been. I had been forced to be ready. I had been forced to build a life from the ground up while he had the luxury of walking away. I wanted to scream at him, tell him that his excuses meant nothing to me. But then, "Mommy." My heart stopped. Liam had run back toward me, his small hands tugging at my dress. "I'm thirsty." I reached down, brushing a hand over his soft brown curls. "We'll get some water in a second, sweetheart." And then, before I could stop it, Liam's curious eyes turned toward Daniel. Daniel stared at him. At his son. For a moment no one moved. Then, barely above a whisper, Daniel said, "Emma, is he mine?" The air between us crackled with unspoken words. I looked at him, my heart pounding. And then I said, "It doesn't matter." Because it didn't. Daniel had made his choice years ago. And I wasn't about to let him waltz back in just because he had suddenly decided he wanted to. Liam had a family. A real one. And Daniel? He was just a ghost from a past I had long since left behind. I thought that would be the end of it. That after our confrontation in the park, Daniel would take the hint and disappear, just like he had before. I was wrong. Because Daniel wasn't just here to talk. He had already done his own digging. The next day as I was leaving work, I found him waiting outside. "I know the truth now," he said, his voice a mix of guilt and urgency. "Liam is mine." I gritted my teeth, my exhaustion turning to frustration. "That's not your business anymore." He exhaled sharply. "How can you say that?" "He's my son." "No," I shot back, my voice cold. "He's my son. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who raised him. You don't get to show up now and act like you deserve anything." Daniel looked down, swallowing hard. "I should have been there." I let out a bitter laugh. "You think?" Silence stretched between us, heavy with years of resentment and lost time. Then quietly he said, "I want to be in his life. My breath hitched. I had expected regret. I had expected excuses. But this? Well. You don't just get to decide that now, I said, crossing my arms. You left me when I needed you the most. You abandoned him before he was even born. What makes you think you have the right to walk back in? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his frustration bubbling over. Emma, I was young. I was stupid. I made mistakes. I shook my head, my heart pounding. You made a choice. A choice that left me alone. A choice that forced me to fight battles he never even had to see. Daniel hesitated. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to try. I want to be his father. I flinched at the word. Not because I hadn't prepared for this moment, but because I had. And I knew exactly what I needed to say. Liam already has a father, I said. Daniel's face fell. What? I took a slow breath, steadying myself. His name is Ryan. He's been there for him. He's the one who tucks him in at night. The one who reads him bedtime stories. The one who's held his hand through fevers and nightmares. You don't get to take that from him just because you suddenly feel guilty. Daniel stared at me, his mouth slightly open, like he hadn't expected this. Like he had thought he could just fix things with an apology. But this wasn't about him. It never had been. I glanced at my watch, suddenly desperate to end this conversation. I have to pick Liam up from daycare. Daniel stepped closer, his voice softer now. Emma, please. Just let me see him. Once. My chest tightened. Could I do that? Could I let the man who had left me, who had left us, meet the child he had abandoned? Would that be fair to Liam? Or would it just reopen wounds that had finally started to heal? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But one thing was clear. Daniel might have discovered the truth. But that didn't mean he had a place in our lives. Not unless I decided he did. And that was a choice he no longer had control over. I didn't give Daniel an answer that day. I couldn't. The idea of him suddenly wanting to be in Liam's life felt too surreal, too convenient. For years I had done everything alone. Every late-night fever, every scraped knee, every school performance, I had been there. And now, out of nowhere, Daniel thought he could just show up? Well, it wasn't that simple. But Daniel didn't give up. A few days after our conversation he texted me. Daniel, Emma, I know I hurt you. But please let me see him. Just once. I ignored it. Then he sent another. Daniel, I don't want to take him from you. I just want to know him. So I didn't reply. Then the next day I saw him at Liam's daycare. I froze. Liam hadn't noticed him yet, too busy laughing with his friends. But Daniel was standing at a distance, his hands in his pockets, watching. I walked straight up to him, my heart hammering. What are you doing here? He exhaled, looking exhausted. I just wanted to see him. That's not how this works, Daniel. I kept my voice low, controlled, but my patience was wearing thin. You don't get to stalk his daycare. If you want to talk about this, we do it on my terms. He nodded, rubbing his face. I get it. I don't know how to do this. I studied him carefully. For the first time, he didn't look like the arrogant man who had walked away from me years ago. He looked uncertain. But that didn't mean I trusted him. That night I talked to Ryan. He listened as I paced around our living room, my emotions tangled between frustration and fear. What if he takes me to court? I blurted. What if he actually wants custody? Ryan leaned forward, his voice calm. Legally he could try. But you have full custody. He left, Emma. Any judge will see that. I sighed, sitting down beside him. But what if he actually means it? What if he really wants to be in Liam's life now? Ryan was quiet for a moment, then said, the question isn't about what he wants. It's about what's best for Liam. And that was the problem. Because I didn't know what was best. Liam had never asked about his biological father. Ryan had been in his life since he was little. He didn't know any different. Would bringing Daniel in now just confuse him? Or would it hurt him more if I didn't? After a long silence, I said, I'll let him meet Liam. Once. Ryan nodded, squeezing my hand. And if it doesn't feel right? Then it ends there. The following weekend I arranged the meeting. We met at a quiet cafe, away from any familiar places Liam associated with safety. I didn't want him to feel like his world was shifting under him. Ryan came with me, not as a threat, not to intimidate, but because he was part of this family. He had every right to be there. When Daniel arrived, he looked nervous. Liam was coloring at the table, completely unaware of what was happening. Then finally I said, Liam, this is Daniel. He's an old friend. Liam glanced up, smiling politely. Hi. Daniel exhaled as if he had been holding his breath. Hi, buddy. I studied Liam carefully, searching for any sign of discomfort. But to him this was just another adult in a world full of strangers. He turned back to his coloring. Daniel's expression faltered. It was clear he had expected more. Some moment of connection, some instinctual recognition. But Liam didn't know him. Because Daniel hadn't been there. Ryan, ever the steady presence, leaned over and smiled at Liam. Hey bud, why don't you show Daniel your drawing? Liam beamed, turning his paper around. It's a rocket ship. It's flying to the moon. Daniel swallowed hard. That's great. I watched as he struggled to find the right words. To find his place. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't even about Daniel. It was about Liam. And Liam wasn't some lost child looking for a father. He already had one. Ryan had been there for him in every way that mattered. And Daniel was just a man trying to understand the life he had missed out on. After an hour, Liam started to get restless. I stood up, taking his hand. We should go. Daniel hesitated. Can I see him again? I took a slow breath. Then I asked, what happens when this gets hard, Daniel? When being a father isn't just sitting at a cafe talking about drawings? He met my gaze. I don't know. And that was the difference. Ryan had never hesitated. Ryan had chosen us over and over again. Daniel, he wasn't sure. And that wasn't enough. I reached for Liam's jacket. I need time to think about it. Daniel nodded, understanding that this wasn't an open door. It was barely cracked. As we walked away, Liam holding my hand on one side and Ryan's on the other, I felt something shift inside me. For years I had carried the weight of Daniel's choices. But now it was my choice. And I wasn't about to let him rewrite the past just because he suddenly wanted to. Liam deserved stability. He deserved love that didn't leave. And that's exactly what he already had. After the meeting at the cafe, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Seeing Daniel struggle to connect with Liam had stirred something in me. Not sympathy but clarity. For years I had been afraid of this moment. I had worried that one day Daniel would return and disrupt everything I had built. But now that he had, I realized something profound. Liam already had a father. And it wasn't the man who had given him his last name. It was the man who had been there, for the late nights, the scraped knees, the whispered bedtime stories. The man who had shown up, day after day, never expecting anything in return. It was Ryan. That evening, as we put Liam to bed, Ryan sat beside him, flipping through one of his favorite storybooks. Liam curled up close, his small fingers clutching Ryan's sleeve. I watched them from the doorway, my heart full and aching all at once. Mommy, Liam mumbled sleepily. Can Ryan stay? I smiled softly. Of course, sweetheart. Liam nodded, satisfied, before drifting into sleep. Ryan carefully tucked the blanket around him, then turned to me. You okay? I let out a slow breath, walking toward him. I think so. He studied me for a moment. What's on your mind? I hesitated, then said, I think I finally understand something. Ryan tilted his head. Yeah. I took a deep breath, my voice steady. Fatherhood isn't about biology. It's about showing up. About being there even when it's inconvenient, even when it's hard. His expression softened, but he stayed quiet, letting me find my words. Daniel might be Liam's biological father, I continued. But you're his dad. Ryan blinked, his jaw tightening slightly. He wasn't the kind of man who got emotional easily, but I saw it. The way his hands clenched, the way his throat bobbed as he swallowed. You mean that? He asked quietly. I nodded. I do. Something shifted in his eyes. Something deep and unspoken. He reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. I never wanted to replace anyone, he murmured. I just wanted to love both of you the best way I knew how. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from gratitude. Ryan had never asked for this life. He had never asked to step into a role that another man had abandoned. But he had done it anyway. And that was love. Not words. Not empty promises. But showing up. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Daniel's sudden regrets dictate our future. Liam didn't need a man who had left. He needed the one who had stayed. And that was exactly what Ryan had always done. I thought after our last conversation, Daniel would accept my decision. That he would understand that he couldn't just step back in after years of absence. But regret has a way of eating at a person. And Daniel? He was drowning in it. I saw it in the way he started trying. Showing up at Liam's daycare, asking about him, offering to help financially, anything to make up for the years he had lost. At first I wanted to believe it was genuine. That he had really changed. But the truth was simpler than that. Daniel wasn't fighting for Liam. He was fighting his own guilt. One evening he called me. I almost didn't pick up. But something in me, the part that had once loved him, the part that had needed closure, told me I should. When I answered, he was quiet for a long moment. Then finally he said, "I messed up, Emma." I closed my eyes, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I know. I didn't think about what I was leaving behind," he continued. "I thought, I don't know, that I'd move on. That I'd be happier." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "And were you?" Silence. Then a soft, bitter chuckle. "No." I exhaled, my grip tightening around the phone. For years I had dreamed of this moment. Of Daniel admitting that he had been wrong. That he had made a mistake. But now that it was happening, it didn't bring the satisfaction I had expected. Because it didn't change anything. "What do you want from me, Daniel?" I asked, my voice steady. He sighed heavily. "I don't know. I want to be in his life. I want to fix this." I closed my eyes. Fix this. Like it was that simple. Like years of absence could be undone with good intentions. "He doesn't know you," I said, forcing the words out. "You're a stranger to him, Daniel. You don't get to just walk in and expect everything to fall into place." "I know," he admitted. "But I have to try." I hesitated. I could hear the sincerity in his voice. The regret. Vain. But the problem was, regret wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the nights I had spent rocking Liam to sleep alone. It wasn't enough to erase the fear I had felt when I wondered if I would be enough for my son. It wasn't enough to erase the years of distance between them. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I need time to think about this." Daniel didn't push. "Okay." And for the first time in a long time I realized something. I forgave him. Not because he deserved it. But because I did. I didn't want to carry the weight of his mistakes anymore. I had moved on. And Daniel? He was left standing in the ruins of the life he had chosen to abandon. After my conversation with Daniel, I expected to feel conflicted. To feel torn between the past and the present, between giving him a second chance and protecting the life I had built. But as I sat in the quiet of my home watching Ryan help Liam put together a puzzle on the living room floor, I realized something. I wasn't torn at all. I had already made my choice. And it wasn't Daniel. That night, after Liam went to bed, I turned to Ryan. "I talked to Daniel today." Ryan didn't look surprised. "How'd it go?" I exhaled slowly. "He wants to be in Liam's life." A flicker of emotion crossed Ryan's face. Concern, maybe even a hint of sadness. "And what do you want?" I hesitated. Then with certainty I said, "I want this." His brow furrowed slightly. "Emma, you don't have to." "I know," I interrupted gently. "I know I don't have to choose between him and you. But that's not what this is about. This isn't a battle. It's just," I let out a breath. "I don't want to look back anymore. I spent years surviving what he did to me. And I did survive. But I also moved on." Ryan studied me, searching my face. "So what happens now?" I swallowed hard, then said, "I'll let Daniel see Liam. Supervised. Fully. But he doesn't get to rewrite history. He doesn't get to come back and erase everything that happened." Ryan nodded, processing my words. "And us?" I smiled softly, reaching for his hand. "You are my future, Ryan." The tension in his shoulders eased and he exhaled, squeezing my fingers. I had worried, maybe irrationally, that Ryan would feel insecure about this. That he'd think I was opening a door that should stay closed. But Ryan had never been like that. He had always trusted me. Because love wasn't about possession. It wasn't about proving something. It was about showing up. Just like he always had. The next few weeks were strange. I met with Daniel again and we talked about how to move forward. I set firm boundaries. He would not introduce himself to Liam as his father right away. If he wanted to be in his life, he had to earn it. And to my surprise, Daniel accepted that. He didn't fight me. Maybe because, deep down, he knew he deserved to start from the bottom. The first time he saw Liam again, it was at the park. I watched from a distance as they sat on a bench together, Daniel asking him about his favorite superhero, about what he liked to do. Liam answered politely but without much excitement. Because to him Daniel was just another adult. I knew then that this wasn't going to be some miraculous reunion. There was no magical moment where Liam suddenly realized who Daniel was and ran into his arms. No, this was going to take time. And maybe that was a good thing. Maybe for once Daniel would have to work for something real. But as I watched them I also knew something else. Even if Liam and Daniel built a relationship, nothing would ever take away the life I had built. As I had already won. Not over Daniel, not over the past. But over everything that had once tried to break me. Months passed. Slowly, steadily things began to settle into a rhythm. Daniel kept his word. He didn't push, didn't demand more than what I allowed. He showed up when I scheduled visits, kept his conversations with Liam light and pressure-free. But despite his efforts, I could see the truth written in every hesitant glance, every strained smile. He was an outsider. Liam still didn't know who he really was. And I wasn't sure if I was ever going to tell him. Not because I wanted to erase Daniel from his life, but because, what did biological truth really mean when the emotional truth had already been written? Liam had a father. A real one. A man who had been there from the beginning, who knew the little things. How Liam hated the crust on his sandwiches, how he always needed his stuffed dinosaur when he was nervous, how he tilted his head when he was curious just like I did. That man was Ryan. And it always had been. One evening Ryan and I sat on the couch, Liam asleep in his room. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the TV in the background. I shifted closer, resting my head against his shoulder. "I think I've finally figured it out," I murmured. Ryan looked down, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on my arm. "Figured what out? What family really means?" His hand stilled and I could feel him waiting, giving me the space to say it in my own time. "For so long I thought it was about blood," I continued. "About biology. But that's not it, is it?" Ryan exhaled softly. "No, it's not." I sat up slightly so I could look at him. Family is about showing up. About loving someone enough to stay even when it's hard. Even when it's inconvenient. He smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. "Yeah. I think so too." I took a deep breath, my chest tightening with emotions I had held back for too long. "Ryan," I hesitated, my fingers gripping his. "I want you to be Liam's father. Officially." His entire body went still. I rushed to explain. "You already are. In every way that matters. But I want it to be real. I want Liam to grow up knowing that the man who loves him chose him." Ryan blinked as if he wasn't sure he had heard me correctly. "Are you saying?" "I want to make it legal," I whispered. "I want you to adopt him." His breath hitched. Then suddenly he laughed, soft and disbelieving, his hands coming up to cup my face. "Emma," he murmured, pressing his forehead to mine. "Are you sure?" I nodded, tears filling my eyes. I've never been more sure of anything. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then in a voice thick with emotion he said, "I'd be honored." The adoption process took time. There were papers to file, meetings to attend, legal steps to take. But through it all Ryan never wavered. And neither did I. When the final court date arrived, we stood before the judge, Liam holding tightly to Ryan's hand. He didn't understand all the legal talk, but he knew something important was happening. And when the judge finally looked at Ryan and asked, "Do you willingly accept full parental responsibility for this child?" Ryan didn't even hesitate. "Yes," he said firmly. "I do." Tears streamed down my face as the judge signed the papers, making it official. Liam turned to Ryan, tilting his head. "What does this mean?" Ryan crouched down, smiling. "It means I get to be your dad forever." Liam beamed, wrapping his little arms around Ryan's neck. "You were already my dad." Ryan closed his eyes, his expression filled with love so deep it made my heart ache. That night as we tucked Liam into bed, he looked up at us sleepily. "I love you, Mommy," he mumbled. I kissed his forehead. "I love you too, baby." Then he turned to Ryan. "Love you, Daddy." Ryan's breath caught, his fingers tightening around the blanket. "I love you too, kiddo," he whispered. And in that moment I knew. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past. Not erasing what had happened. But choosing the future. And I had chosen right.